All right, welcome back to this lecture. Now it's time to learn the graph editor. So I'm going to expand this timeline. Click on here, expand this, because we need a lot of more space when we're working with the graph editor. So I'm going to explain the graph editor as simply as I can. And after this lecture, you can sit down and mess around with the curves. So first, what I need to do is select the root bone and now hover over the timeline and then press on Control Tab to quickly switch to the graph editor. Again, if you want to, you can click on this clock icon and then manually switch to the graph editor. And I switch to the graph editor. Now, you might see this by default. You might see a lot of curves. If you select all the bones, you can see I'm going to have a lot of curves over here, which might look intimidating, but don't worry about it. First thing what I recommend you to do is make sure this arrow is always checked because it shows only keyframes and the bones which are selected. So if I select this bone, I'm going to be able to see this bone's keyframes. If I select this, I'm going to be able to see this keyframes. But if I disable this, I'm going to see every keyframe which I have in the scene. So if I have a lot of characters, I'm going to be able to see all of their keyframes, which is not what we want. So make sure to disable this. Now, the reason why beginners are afraid of graph editor is because they see a lot of curves and they don't know what to do with it. But that's not an optimal way of working inside the graph editor, because you need to hide some curves and then unhide them later on, because you need to work in a graph editor step by step. So let me show you how this works. So first, you'll notice we have two extra menus here. We have this menu and then we have this menu. If you want to disable this menu, you can press on N to get rid of it. Now, you can see we have these different curves. We have this blue curve coming over here. We have this red curve coming over here. And we don't see any green curve because we didn't animate anything on the y-axis. So since we animated the blue axis, the z-axis, and then the x-axis, we only see those keyframes. So first thing I want to show you is graph editor navigation is the same as in other menus, as in the timeline, as the viewport. You can zoom in and zoom out with the scroll wheel. You can hold the scroll wheel to move in and out. You can also hold Control, hold the middle mouse, and zoom it out like this. So if you click on Control and then middle mouse, you can make your keyframes larger or smaller on left and right. So that's a pretty good way to navigate inside the graph editor. So again, zoom in and zoom out, Shift hold on the middle mouse, pan around, and then Control, scroll, and then zoom in and out. Now, let me show you what the graph editor shows you. So the graph editor shows you the progression of value over time. These are the same keyframes which we see in the timeline. So let me show you what the value means. So if I go to frame 12, which is the highest point, if you remember, we moved the slime around 3 meters tall because I pressed on N, I went here, and then it shows me that it's on 3.1732 meters high, right? So if I want to see how high that is inside the graph editor, I can actually look at this value. So this is -1, 0, 2, and then 3. So this graph editor shows me that slime moved on 3 meters on frame 12. So that basically shows me the same thing the timeline shows me, but in a more advanced way. So now look at this blue line. The blue line in Blender is the Z-axis. Again, if I go here, enable Z, you can see it's blue. Red is X, and then white is green. So now if I disable this, I don't really need to see this. So this shows me the progression of the Z-axis. So this shows me, if I go back in the beginning, this shows me that the cube or the slime was placed on frame 0, on the 0 value. The 0 value means that it was placed on the world origin. It had no location. Then it went up like this. So this is a Bezier motion, like the easy in, ease out, slow in, slow out motion. And then it went up like this on frame 12. And then it went by 3 meters tall. And then it went down again exactly the same way on the smooth curve. Now, what I want to show you is how to manipulate the curves, because there are many, many ways of doing this. First, I'm going to zoom out. Now, if I want to move my slime up, I can either do it manually by pressing G, Z, and then moving it up. And now watch what happens if I move it up. You can see this curve increases. And now it shows me that instead of 3 meters, I'm at, for example, 5 meters height. So this curve changes based on what I change in the viewport. Now, I can also, instead of doing it in the viewport, I can select the graph editor handles. So graph editor has a bunch of handles. It has the main handle in the center, the keyframe, which is the actual keyframe. And then it has 2 more handles next to it. So this is the same keyframe we set in the timeline. This is the same keyframe we set in the timeline, but it also has 2 extra handles which we can control. But I'm going to show you how to do it later on. So select the frame 12, which is this one. I can either left click and select this, or drag, box drag and select this. And now I can press on G, Z, lock it on the Z axis, and then move it up like this. And now you can see I'm going to be able to move it up or down, and it's going to change the appearance inside the viewport as well. But now the animation looks weird because it moves way too high. So we can just Control Z, and we don't want to do that. Now, the next thing I want to show you is how to manipulate the handles. Now, let's say I want to frame 6. and then I want the slime to go down. Again, I can do it manually, but I can select the graph editor main keyframe, which is this one, the centered one, press on G, Z, and then move the handle down like this. And now you can see it's going to follow it, and it's going to move it down. Obviously, that's not accurate, so we can Control Z, but I want to show you how to move the handles. So now I'm going to go to frame 6, and then I'm going to show you different handle types we have. So first, in the graph editor, let's say I want to select the right handle of the frame 6 and then manipulate it, right? If I press on G and then move it, you can see the previous curve is also being affected, but sometimes that's not what we want. So instead, we want to set this to free so that we can rotate this without the back part being affected. So what I can do for that is press on V, and now we have a menu with different handle types. You don't have to know all of them. What I mostly use is the default one, which is the auto clamped. Then I also use vector, and then I use free. So now if I want to rotate this freely and I change this freely without it being affected, I can press on V, change this to free. And now you can see if I move this, the keyframes here are affected, but the curves here are no longer affected. So that's a very good way to manipulate the keyframes further. So for example, if I rotate this and then move this up, I'm going to create an overshoot, which means that the bouncing slime is going to go up towards the intended keyframes, and then it's going to go down. So the intended height for the bouncing slime is 3 meters, but right here it's going to go on 4 meters, and then quickly going to go back to 3 meters. So that's called an overshoot. Now you can create overshoot with many different methods, but that's just one of the dirty methods I'm showing you right now. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you different handle types. Now I don't use this menu a lot, but I'm going to show you the different handle types. So if I select this keyframe again, I have the left handle, which is this one, and the right handle, which is this one. And now the default handle type is set to auto clamped. So if I press on G and then try to move this keyframe down, Blender is going to try to maintain the location and the curvature of these handles. So if I move it down, you can see it stays aligned pretty much. Now, as soon as I try to rotate it or scale it, you can see it changes its type to aligned, because aligned is a bit different than auto clamped. So if I try to create an overshoot, for example, if I go up and then try to create an overshoot, I cannot really do that with the auto clamped. But if I want to, for example, scale this, move this up, and then rotate this slightly, now it changes to aligned, and I'm going to be able to create an overshoot with the aligned keyframe. So I'm going to go up, down, and like this. Again, you can also select this and then set this to free, like we discussed before. Now it's going to be free, and then these are no longer going to be affected. So Blender is not going to decide where this and this handle goes. You decide where this handle goes. So if I scroll it up, I'm going to select this handle, move it wherever I want, move this wherever I want, press on G to move it out, or press or S to scale it down. So you can use the same shortcuts, G, S, R, and so on. Now, let me show you a third handle type, which is called the vector. So if I select this and then press on V and then set this to vector, you can see it becomes a lot sharper. And then if I select another keyframe on frame 12 and then press on V and then set this to vector, now if I have two keyframes which have vector, basically the same as selecting these, press on T and then linear, because they're going to become linear. But linear interpolation does not have any handles, as you can see. But vector still has a lot of handles which you can manipulate and change it like this. But again, you can know the graph editor, but you don't have to use it all the time. But there are some cases where you might find useful to tweak the curves to your liking. Now you also have another type, which is the automatic, which is also going to try to maintain the smoothness. So if I set different handle types to automatic, it's going to try to maintain the smooth interpolation between the curves, but I personally don't use it a lot. I mostly use the default ones. Sometimes I use free and sometimes I use vector. But to be honest, I don't use graph editor that often as well, but I still want to show you how to use the graph editor, because after all, this is an animation chapter, animation course, and I want you to learn how to use the graph editor. So now we can move on to polishing the actual animation instead of just explaining the keyframes, and I want to show you how graph editor works in practice. Now I want to explain the basics of how the motion looks inside the graph editor. Now, if you have a line which is flat, it means that the motion is either very slow or it means the object is not moving at all. So if you have a straight line, it means the object is stationary. But if you have the small line, going up and down, it means the motion is slow. And same here, between like frame 8 and 12, the motion is very slow. But if you have a line which is going up horizontally like this, for example, from frame 2 and then frame 8, if you have this line, it means the motion is very fast. We have a lot of motion. So if you look at the bouncing slime animation, you can see that is exactly the case. So between frame 0 and 2, there is not much motion with the root bone. So as you can see, the root bone is staying in one place almost. It slightly goes up. And then it goes up very high between frame 2 and 8, like this. And then it goes up slightly between frame 8 and 12, which is why we have the small, tiny curve. We don't have a stationary curve like this because it's not staying in one place. It's still moving around. Now, same here. After frame 12, you can see between frame 12 and 16, there's a very small curve going down, which is why this motion is very small, subtle. But between frame 16 and then frame 22, we have a sudden drop. So it goes down like this, vertically. So basically what I'm trying to explain, the more vertical the curve, the more motion you have. The more horizontal the curve, the less motion you have, pretty much. So that's a very simple way of looking at the graph editor. And if you understand this, you're going to understand a lot about how graph editor works. So now that it's out of the way, I'm going to add very small tweaks to the graph editor. And now we can move on to the next steps. So first thing I want to do is when the slime hits the floor, and then before the slime hits the floor, I have this smooth curve, which is what I don't want, because in the real world, before an object hits the floor, it goes very fast in a straight line. So what I can do for that is either I can select this handle. For example, I can select the last keyframe, select the handle, and then try to make this line straight. But instead of doing it manually, so I want this line to be straight like this. Instead of doing it manually, I can select the last keyframe, and then press on V, and then set this to vector. So now you can see this line becomes a lot straighter, which is exactly what we want, because when the ball comes down, it doesn't come down like this in a smooth way, right? Because this is smooth way, which is what we don't want. We want it to come down very fast in a vector motion. So again, select this last keyframe. And now I think this is a good time to show you how to filter through different curves. So I'm having trouble selecting the last keyframe because it selects the X keyframe. So now what I want you to do is go to the left side, expand this menu, and then expand the main. And now we have different motions over here. So what I want you to do is only focus on the Z location, because when we moved the slime up, we focused on the Z location. So when I press on G, Z, move it up, you can see I'm only moving in the Z location right here. So what I want to do is hide everything. And the way you can hide everything is by clicking on this eye icon over here. So I press on eye icon, I'm going to hide all the curves. But I can either hide everything together like this, and then unhide the Z location right here. We have location keyframes, rotation keyframes, and then Z scale keyframes. But there's another method. I can actually select the Z location. And if I select the Z location, I can hover over this and press on Shift H. And this is going to hide everything but the Z location. So now I only need the Z location curve. And that's an easy way to work inside the graph editor actually. And another trick I want to show you is if you want a frame selected, if you remember, we want to edit preferences in the previous chapters, and I want to the frame selected. So if you go to edit preferences, go to key map, type frame selected. I set the frame selected to F inside the graph editor. But if you have it on default, I think you should have the numpad period. So now I have set it to F, and if I close this, and if I press on A to select all the keyframes, I can press on F, and now it's going to zoom in on my keyframes entirely, which is a very comfortable way of working with the graph editor. So now that we hit all of these keyframes, what I can do is select the last keyframe, so frame 24, and then press on V, and then set this to vector. And that's it. Now I can do the same thing on frame 2. Not frame 0, but frame 2, because the cube goes up from frame 2 to frame 10. So yeah, make sure to select frame 2, press on V, and then set this to vector as well. And that's it. The slime is going to jump up right away. So now we can disable the overlays and watch our animation and see how it looks and see if we're happy with it. Now, another cool trick I want to show you is more stylized option, but you can actually do it inside the graph editor pretty easily. So if I select frame 12, for example here, if I want my character to hold, if I want the slime to hold slightly in the air, I can actually take this curve and then scale it outwards so that the line becomes flat. And if the line becomes flat, it means the motion is holding and then the slime doesn't have a lot of movement. And that's a very good stylized preference. Again, it's not physically accurate, but you can actually do it. So again, you can do it manually or you can do it inside the graph editor as well. And now you can see I have the hold animation over here. Now, if I do it go extreme, you can see the slime is going to hold and then go down. But I think that's way too robotic and that's way too much. So I'm going to scale the curves down slightly. Now, what we can also do is select different bones and polish different bones. So we already polished the root bone and we can polish these ones, but I don't think we have to polish them that much. It's a beginner course. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I'm still going to show you how you can select and deselect the bones. So again, select this bone, for example. And if you remember, around this bone, we animated the scale and then we animated the location as well. But we didn't animate any rotation at all. So if you want to keep the graph editor clean, you can select this W quaternion rotation shift select the X, Y, and then Z rotation as well, and then press on X and then delete them because we don't need them. Now I can do the same thing with the root bone. Select the root bone, and then the root bone only has the Z location and nothing else. So what we can do is actually manually delete everything else. So I can drag up and then delete the rotation and scale keyframes. So press on X and delete them, and then select X and Y location and delete them as well. And now we're only left with the Z location. And that's exactly what we want in this case. We can also select this, but this is actually optional. You don't have to do that, but we can select the second bone as well. And then delete all of the rotation keyframes because we didn't animate any rotation at all. We animated the scale and then we animated the location. And one more note I want to add is you don't have to use Graph Editor all the time. I use it very rarely. Some animators like to use motion path. So they go over here in the bone properties, expand the motion path, calculate the motion path, click on calculate, and they see the motion path over here. So this means that if there's a large distance between the dots, it means the motion is fast. If there's a small distance between the dots, it means the motion is slow. And you can actually use that. So once we're happy with the animation, let's go back to timeline. Let's shrink this down and let's watch our animation over and over again. And if we want to improve something, we can go ahead and improve it either from the viewport or from the graph editor, because now you know how to use the graph editor and how to make the basic keyframe and curve adjustments. Now, last step I recommend you to do is watch the animation from different angles. So watch it from the front view, from the side view, from the 3D view. You can also view it from the orthographic view. And then if you don't like anything, go over the keyframes manually and change them. Now, if you're struggling with animating on your own, you can actually go to the course files, open up this bouncing slime blender file, and you can see how it's made and mess around with different curves, change them, animate them, and do whatever you want, and use it as a reference as well.